The cell stank of rust, ozone, and despair. Alira sat hunched on the cold, metallic floor, her crimson skin dull under the dim, flickering light. Her long, blue hair fell over her face like a veil, hiding her hollowed eyes. The mining colony of Drathor was as merciless as the crime lord who ruled it, and the fortress she now called her prison reeked of his malevolence. She traced the sharp-edged collar around her neck, its faint hum reminding her of the power it sapped from her. The psychic suppression device was an abomination, a crude invention of the slave markets designed to turn even the strongest telepath into a docile prisoner. Once she could feel the world around her in waves of emotion, hear whispers of thoughts as clearly as spoken words. Now her mind was a dark, silent void, and she was alone. Alira wasn't just any Cathari. Her kind, known for their striking appearance and powerful telepathic abilities, had once ruled among the stars. The fall of her people began with an invasion they couldn't foresee, orchestrated by the very galactic council meant to protect them. She had been taken during the purge, her family slaughtered as she watched from the confines of a slave ship. Sold and resold, her value increased with each transaction, her telepathic lineage a rare commodity. Varric Corrin had paid the highest price for her, and he intended to make it worthwhile. Corrin's goals were never explicitly shared, but Alira had heard enough in whispers between guards to piece together fragments. He wasn't just a slaver. He was a puppet master, a player in the galactic underworld with ambitions far beyond Drathor's barren wastes. Alira was his tool, meant to be conditioned until she was useful. Whether that meant breaking her for her obedience or bending her abilities to serve his schemes, she didn't know. She only knew one thing: Corrin's games always ended in death. The hiss of the cell door jolted her from her thoughts. Her muscles tensed as a figure entered. Not a guard. His stance was different, his movements precise, silent. He wore no uniform, just a scuffed leather jacket and dark pants that clung to a lean, battle-hardened frame. The dim light glinted off a holstered weapon at his hip. He pulled back his hood, revealing a face carved by years of conflict. His brown eyes scanned the cell, sharp and calculating. There was an edge to his presence, but something about his demeanor felt different. Less like a predator, more like a storm held in check. Alira narrowed her eyes, her voice rasping from disuse. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer, his boots soundless on the floor. "Jadon," he said, his tone low and clipped. "I'm getting you out." And Alira stared at him, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "And why would you do that? Do you know what happens to people who defy Corrin?" "I'm not here for Corrin," Jadon replied, his gaze steady. "And I don't have time to explain. If you want to live, you'll come with me? Now." She didn't move. Her instincts screamed for caution. Why me? There are dozens of others locked up here. Why not free them? Jadon's jaw tightened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "I don't have the luxury of saving everyone. You're the priority." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications she couldn't untangle. She hated how tempting they sounded, hated how her chest tightened at the thought of escape. "And if I refuse?" she asked, testing him. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then you die in this cell. Corrin won't keep you as a decoration forever." The mention of Corrin snapped her resolve. She rose slowly, her legs shaky, wings pressing against her back for balance. Even tattered and broken, they still carried fragments of their former elegance. "Fine," she said, glaring at him. "But if this is a trick, you'll regret it." Jadon gave a curt nod and turned toward the door. "Stay close. And keep quiet." The fortress was a labyrinth of metal and shadows. Jadon moved with practiced efficiency, his steps silent, his posture coiled like a predator ready to strike. Alira struggled to match his pace, her bare feet aching against the cold floor. She felt the weight of the suppression collar growing heavier, its buzzing almost a taunt as she longed to reach out psychically, to sense their pursuers. The corridors seemed to close in around them, the hum of distant machinery a constant backdrop. Guards patrolled the area in pairs, their boots echoing ominously. Jadon led her through side passages and maintenance shafts, his every move calculated. Alira's breath came in short, shallow gasps, her body weaker than she'd realized after weeks of confinement. "Who sent you?" she whispered when they paused in a dimly lit alcove. "No one," he said without looking at her. "This is personal." His curt responses infuriated her. Why risk yourself for a stranger? Jadon's eyes flicked toward her, their sharpness softening briefly. "Because someone once did the same for me, and I owe it to them." Before she could ask more, the sound of voices approached, Jaden shoved her behind a stack of crates and crouched, drawing a sleek blaster from his belt. Alira's pulse quickened as two guards rounded the corner, their conversation punctuated by laughter. Jaden fired without hesitation. The first guard dropped instantly, the second only managing a strangled shout before falling beside his companion. Alira flinched at the sharp scent of scorched flesh. "Move," Jaden ordered, already heading down the corridor. They reached the docking bay minutes later. Alira froze at the sight of the ship's rows of hulking vessels gleaming under harsh floodlights. Freedom loomed just ahead, tantalizing yet impossible. Then the alarms blared. "Damn it," Jaden muttered. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the nearest ship. "Run. Run." Guards flooded into the bay, their weapons raised. Jaden fired rapidly, each shot precise. Alira grabbed a metal rod from a nearby crate, her hands shaking as she swung it at a guard who got too close. Her strikes were clumsy but fueled by desperation. "Get on board," Jaden shouted, covering her as she climbed into the cargo ship. He followed, slamming the hatch shut as blaster fire ricocheted off the hull. The engines roared to life, and the ship shuddered as it lifted off. Alira collapsed onto the floor, her chest heaving. She stared at Jaden, who was already at the controls, his fingers dancing over the console. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice barely a whisper. Jaden didn't turn. "Because you're worth saving." The ship pierced Drather's atmosphere, breaking free of its polluted skies. Beyond lay the vastness of space, endless and filled with possibilities. For the first time in years, Alira felt the faint stirrings of hope. But she knew better than to trust it. Freedom was never without a price. The ship hurtled through the star-speckled void, its engines humming steadily. Inside, the silence between Alira and Jaden was as vast as the galaxy they traversed. She sat rigidly on the cold metal bench in the cargo hold, her crimson skin catching the dim light of the overhead panels. The adrenaline from their escape had worn off, leaving her with a gnawing unease. Her fingers brushed the suppression collar still clamped around her neck. The faint hum that once muted her telepathic powers now felt deafening. Alira clenched her jaw, frustrated by her helplessness. Jaden entered the hold, wiping soot from his hands. His rugged face was unreadable as he leaned against a bulkhead. "We should be clear of pursuit for now. Corrin's ships don't have the range to follow this far." Alira lifted her gaze, her distrust palpable. "Why should I believe you? For all I know, you're just another trader looking to cash in." Jaden raised an eyebrow, his tone calm but firm. "If I wanted to sell you, I wouldn't have risked my neck getting you out of there." "That doesn't answer my question." She stood, her wings flaring slightly despite their battered state. "What do you want from me?" His sharp brown eyes softened just enough to surprise her. "I want to help you." Alira laughed bitterly. "Help me? No one helps a Qatari unless they want something in return." Jaden crossed his arms, his voice steady. "Maybe I'm not like the people you've met." She studied him, searching for cracks in his stoic exterior. There was something in his demeanor, an undertone of weariness, as though he carried a weight he wouldn't share. It made her uneasy. Vulnerability in others always masked danger. "Fine," she said, sitting back down. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Jaden replied. "You need rest, and I need to get that collar off you." Her hand flew to the device instinctively. "Why do you care?" "Because Corrin won't stop looking for you." His expression darkened. "You're not the first person he's used, and you won't be the last. I've seen what he does. I'm not letting him do it again." The conviction in his voice silenced her, though suspicion lingered. She wanted to trust him, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The ship entered a small nebula, its swirling colors bathing the cabin in a surreal light. Jaden worked at the navigation console, his fingers deftly adjusting controls. Alira watched him from the corner of the room, her thoughts a tangled web. "Who are you really?" she asked, breaking the quiet. He didn't look up. "I told you, Jaden Callahan." "That's not an answer." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I used to work for people like Corrin. Mercenaries, bounty hunters, smugglers, you name it. I was good at it too. Until I realized the people I was helping weren't any better than the ones I was fighting." "Is this some kind of redemption for you?" she asked, her tone edged with skepticism. "Maybe," he admitted. "But this isn't about me. It's about you." Alira frowned. "Why me?" Jaden hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice low. "You're not just any Cathari. You're one of the last with pure telepathic lineage. Corin knew that, and so does anyone else who deals in your kind. You're valuable to them in ways you don't even understand." Her breath caught, anger and fear surging in equal measure. "I'm not a tool for you or anyone else." "I don't think you are," Jaden said quickly. "But they do, and that's why I got you out." Before she could respond, a piercing alarm blared from the console. Jaden shot to his feet, his jaw tightening. "We've got company." Alira followed him to the cockpit, her heart racing. The ship's sensors displayed an incoming vessel, its signature unmistakably Corin's. "How did they find us?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Corin has resources," Jaden said grimly. "He must have tagged you somehow." Alira touched the collar around her neck. "The suppression device?" Jaden nodded. "Probably. We'll deal with it later. Right now we need to outrun them." The ship shuddered as blaster fire streaked past its hull. Jaden's hands flew over the controls, steering them into the nebula's dense clouds. The ship groaned in protest, but the interference provided cover. "Hold on," Jaden warned, executing a sharp maneuver that sent Alira stumbling. She braced herself against the wall, her wings brushing the cold metal. The ship dived deeper into the nebula, its engine straining against the turbulence. The enemy ship pursued relentlessly, its weapons lighting up the swirling mists. Jaden's jaw clenched as he pushed the vessel to its limits. "They're faster than us," he muttered. Alira's gaze darted to the console. "What if I could help?" He glanced at her, skeptical. "Your powers are blocked." "Not entirely," she said, determination hardening her tone. "If I can focus, I might be able to sense their pilot, predict their moves." Jaden hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." She closed her eyes, her hands gripping the edges of the console. The collar buzzed angrily, sending sharp pain through her nerves. She pushed past it, digging into the vestiges of her abilities. Slowly, faint impressions emerged, a mind focused on destruction, a pilot's intent to pin them down. "There," she whispered, pointing. "He's going to fire right." Jaden veered the ship sharply, dodging a barrage of blaster fire. Alira gasped, the effort draining her. "You did it," Jaden said, his voice tinged with astonishment. "Can you do it again?" She nodded weakly. Together they maneuvered through the nebula, her fragmented telepathy guiding his evasive maneuvers. The enemy ship faltered, its system struggling against the nebula's interference. Finally, Jaden executed a risky dive, losing their pursuer in the swirling clouds. As the alarms quieted, Alira slumped against the wall, her breath ragged. Jaden placed a hand on her shoulder. "You just saved us." She looked up at him, exhaustion etched into her features. "I don't even know if I can trust you." "You don't have to," he replied. "But we're in this together now." For the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. It unsettled her, yet it felt oddly reassuring. Perhaps he wasn't as infallible as he seemed. Perhaps he wasn't lying about wanting to help. But trust was still a distant star, barely visible in the vast darkness of her doubt. The silence of the ship stretched taut like a thread on the verge of snapping. Alira sat cross-legged on the floor of the cargo hold, her crimson fingers running absently over the raised, angry marks on her neck where the suppression collar had been. Though the device was gone, its phantom weight lingered. Her wings, now unfurled for the first time in years, twitched involuntarily with every hum of the ship's engines. Jaden was in the cockpit, murmuring into a comm unit. She couldn't make out the words, but his tone was clipped, impatient. He had been distant since the skirmish on the desolate moon, his face unreadable as he piloted them through the emptiness of space. Alira didn't trust him, couldn't trust him, but for now, she had no choice. Her thoughts turned to the brief moments when her telepathy had flared during the fight. It was like trying to grasp smoke. Her abilities were faint and unpredictable, flickering in and out like a dying star. Even now, with the collar removed, her connection to the psychic web of the universe felt fractured. Jaden's boots clanked against the metal floor as he entered the hold, breaking her reverie. His presence filled the small space, though he said nothing at first. He leaned against the bulkhead, crossing his arms as he studied her. His face was shadowed, half lit by the dim glow of the overhead lights. "You're quiet," he said finally, his voice low and measured. Alira looked up, meeting his sharp gaze. Should I be thanking you for dragging me into your fight? Jadon's brow furrowed, but he didn't rise to the bait. It's not my fight. It's yours. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? She stood, her wings folding tightly against her back. That you're the noble hero saving the helpless alien. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. I'm no hero, Alira, and you're not helpless. But Karin's not going to stop hunting you. If you want to stay alive, you need to stop pretending you're still in that cell. Her breath hitched at his words. She hated the way they struck a nerve. You don't know me, she said, her tone icy. You're right, Jaden replied, his eyes narrowing. I don't, but I know what Karin does to people like you, and I know you're better off angry than afraid. Alira turned away, her fists clenching at her sides. He wasn't wrong, and that only made her angrier. Where are we even going? To a place where we can figure out our next move, Jaden said. It's not much, but it's secure. Another abandoned outpost, she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. No, he said. A safe house. A friend of mine runs it. If anyone can help us, it's her. Alira spun back toward him, suspicion flaring. A friend? So you trust someone else with my life? I trust her with mine, Jaden said simply. And right now, that's all I've got to offer. The ship slipped into orbit around a forested moon, its surface veined with rivers of silver-blue water. Alira watched from the viewport, her breath catching at the sight. After the lifeless wastelands of Drathor and the cold, empty reaches of space, the moon's lush greenery seemed like an illusion. What is this place? She asked softly. Sanctuary, Jaden said from behind her. His voice was lighter now, almost reverent. Or as close to it as you'll find in this galaxy. The ship landed in a clearing, the soft hiss of hydraulics breaking the quiet. Alira followed Jaden down the ramp, her wings brushing against the humid air. The forest was alive with sound-chirping insects, rustling leaves, the distant trickle of water. For a moment she stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer vitality of the place. Don't get too comfortable, Jaden said, nodding toward a narrow path. We're not alone here. They followed the trail to a small, camouflaged structure nestled among the trees. The building was simple, constructed of weathered metal and reinforced glass, but it exuded a sense of security. Jaden rapped on the door, his movements brisk and confident. The door slid open, revealing a tall woman with olive skin and piercing amber eyes. She wore a long coat patched with various fabrics, giving her the look of someone who thrived on adaptability. Her gaze swept over Alira, then landed on Jaden with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. Jaden, the woman said, crossing her arms. I thought you were done bringing me trouble. Nice to see you too, Mara, Jaden said, his tone dry. We need your help. Mara stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The interior was Spartan but functional, with a few personal touches: a stack of worn books, a tapestry hung on one wall, a potted plant thriving in a corner. Alira lingered near the doorway, her wings brushing the frame as she hesitated. She's nervous, Mara said, her sharp gaze softening. Smart girl. She's not a girl, Jaden corrected, and she's not here to be judged. Alira shot him a look, surprised by the defense. Mara arched an eyebrow but said nothing, turning instead to a console on the far wall. What do you need? She asked, her fingers flying over the controls. Resources, Jaden said, and answers. Mara's lips twitched into a faint smile. When don't you? Later, as Jaden and Mara worked on securing the ship's systems, Alira wandered outside. The forest's energy was almost intoxicating, a stark contrast to the hollow silence she had grown used to. She reached out with her mind, testing the edges of her abilities. The hum of life around her was faint but growing clearer, like a melody returning after a long absence. You're not what I expected, Mara's voice cut through her thoughts. Alira turned to find the woman leaning against a tree, watching her with curiosity. Good, Alira said, her tone sharp. I'm tired of being predictable. Mara chuckled, the sound light but knowing. Fair enough. But if you're going to survive, you need to decide who you are. Karin isn't just after you for your powers. He's after you because you're Qatari. Alira stiffened. What do you mean? Your kind was more than telepaths, Mara said. You were leaders, diplomats, warriors. Karin's afraid of what you represent. Alira's wings flared slightly, her mind racing. And what's that? Hope, Mara said simply. The kind that topples men like him. Alira didn't respond, but the weight of Mara's words settled deep in her chest. She turned back to the forest, her gaze distant. For the first time, she wondered if her survival meant more than just staying alive. Perhaps it meant fighting back. The air inside Mara's safe house was thick with anticipation, as though the forest outside held its breath alongside them. Alira paced the cramped living quarters, her wings twitching with unspent energy. Her crimson skin caught the flicker of the holographic map hovering between Jadon and Mara. Despite the tension, her thoughts wandered to the faint hum of her telepathy, stronger now but still unsteady. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on her chest, a constant reminder of how far she had to go. "We don't have time to play it safe," Jadon said, pointing to a glowing red sector on the map. His voice carried the steel edge of urgency. "Corin's forces are already closing in on refugee routes. If we wait, they'll have more captives and more leverage." Mara crossed her arms, her amber eyes narrowing. "And if you rush in without a plan, you'll only get yourselves killed." Alira stopped pacing, her wings spreading slightly as she turned to face them. "What's the alternative? Stand by and watch them suffer." "You said it yourself, Mara. Corin's consolidating power. We have to do something." Mara shook her head, her expression a mixture of frustration and resignation. "You think I don't want to help? This isn't about what's right. It's about what's possible." Jadon leaned forward, his tone resolute. "We've made it this far because we didn't give up. We're not stopping now." Alira's gaze flicked between them, her chest tightening. She wasn't used to people fighting for her cause or for her. It stirred something unfamiliar, something dangerous. She cleared her throat, pushing the thought aside. "If we don't act, we lose the chance to save them," she said. "What's the point of surviving if we let Corin win?" Mara sighed and gestured to the map. "There's a transport ship scheduled to leave a nearby planet in 2 days. It's carrying Qatari refugees to a supposed sanctuary. My intel says it's a trap. Corin's men plan to intercept it." Alira's wings flared, her voice sharp. "Then we stop them." "It's not that simple," Mara replied. "The transport will be heavily guarded. You're talking about taking on an entire fleet." Jadon glanced at Alira, then back at Mara. "We've faced worse." Mara's lips quirked into a faint smile. "You're as reckless as ever, Jadon." "Reckless works," he said with a shrug. "Sometimes." The night before their departure, the forest was alive with sound, the hum of insects, the rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. Alira stood by a narrow stream near the edge of the clearing, her bare feet sinking into the cool, soft earth. The moonlight bathed her crimson skin in silver, illuminating the faint shimmer of her wings as they rested against her back. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, letting her telepathy stretch into the quiet expanse around her. The forest responded with gentle pulses of emotion, curiosity, calm life. It was beautiful, but fragile, like a melody only she could hear. "You're out here again," Jadon said, his voice breaking the stillness. Alira turned to find him leaning against a tree, his silhouette outlined by the moonlight. His rugged features softened in the pale glow, and for a moment, the sharp edges of his persona seemed to blur. He wasn't the hardened mercenary she had first met. He was something more and something less. "I needed space," she said, her tone guarded, "to think." "And?" he asked, stepping closer. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the stream. "I don't know if I can do this." Jadon's voice softened. "What makes you say that?" Alira looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Because I'm still figuring out who I am, who I'm supposed to be. How can I fight for others when I'm barely holding myself together?" He took another step closer, his presence grounding her. "No one's asking you to have all the answers. You're already doing more than most people would." "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why me?" Jadon's expression shifted, his usual guardedness slipping. "Because you're worth it. And because I've seen what happens when people like you don't get the chance to fight back." Her breath hitched at the honesty in his voice. She took a step toward him, the distance between them shrinking. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he said, his voice low. "But some things are worth the risk." They stood there in the moonlit clearing, the forest a quiet witness to the unspoken tension between them. Alira searched his face, her mind buzzing with thoughts she couldn't control. She hated the vulnerability he uncovered in her, yet she couldn't deny the way it steadied her. Without thinking, she reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek. His skin was warm, rough from years of hardship. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but his eyes locked onto hers, unyielding and intense. "What are we doing?" she whispered. Jadon exhaled, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, trying to figure that out. She laughed softly, the sound more of a release than amusement. "You're impossible." "And you're stubborn," he replied, his voice lighter now. The moment lingered, charged and fragile. Lyra stepped back, her wings brushing against the tree behind her. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be complicated." Jadon nodded, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. "Yeah, complicated." As he turned and walked back toward the safe house, Lyra stayed behind, staring at the stream. Her heart was racing, her thoughts spinning. For the first time in a long time, the walls she had built around herself felt less like armor and more like chains. And she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep them. The ship moved silently through the void, its engines purring softly as Jadon piloted with practiced precision. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes fixed on the glowing controls, though her mind was far from the task at hand. Her crimson fingers tapped rhythmically against the armrest, a small but telling sign of her unease. "Relax," Jadon said without looking at her. "You're going to wear a hole in that chair." "I'll relax when we're not walking into a trap," Lyra replied. Her wings twitched slightly, brushing the back of the seat. "This feels too easy." Jadon smirked faintly. "Since when has anything been easy for us?" She wanted to argue, but he had a point. Their entire journey had been a series of close calls, each one a little more desperate than the last. But something about this mission felt different. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were missing something, like a puzzle with one crucial piece left out. The comm unit crackled, and Mara's voice came through sharp and steady. "You're nearing the target zone. The transport is still on schedule, but you won't have much time once they intercept it." "Understood," Jadon said, adjusting their trajectory. "We'll handle it." Lyra leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as the transport ship came into view on the scanner. It was a hulking vessel, its exterior patched and weathered from years of use. It carried no visible weapons, a clear sign of its vulnerability. "Do you see them?" she asked. "Not yet," Jadon replied, his tone clipped. "But they're here." As if on cue, 3 sleek fighter ships appeared on the edge of the scanner, their movements precise and predatory. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Corrin's hunters were nothing if not efficient. "They're closing in fast," Jadon said, his hands tightening on the controls. "We'll have to draw them off." Lyra nodded, her jaw set. "What's the plan?" Jadon glanced at her, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. "I'll take the lead. You cover the transport." "No," she said firmly. "We do this together." Before he could argue, the first fighter opened fire, its lasers streaking across the void. Jadon yanked the controls, sending their ship into a sharp dive. Lyra grabbed the edge of the console, her wings flaring instinctively for balance. "Together it is," Jadon muttered, his focus shifting back to the fight. The next few moments were a blur of motion and sound. Jadon maneuvered their ship with almost reckless precision, weaving through the enemy fire with an ease that made it clear he had done this before. Lyra's telepathic senses buzzed as she reached out, brushing against the minds of the enemy pilots. Their thoughts were sharp and calculated, but she caught flashes of doubt, hesitation she could exploit. "There," she said, pointing toward the lead fighter. "He's second-guessing his position. Push him." Jadon didn't hesitate, angling their ship toward the fighter in an aggressive maneuver. The pilot faltered, his ship veering off course just enough for Jadon to land a precise shot. The fighter exploded in a burst of fire and debris, the shockwave rattling their ship. "One down," Jadon said. "Nice call." Lyra barely had time to respond before the remaining fighters closed in. She focused again, sending a mental projection into the nearest pilot's mind, a vision of his controls malfunctioning, the oxygen draining from his cockpit. The pilot panicked, his thoughts chaotic as he abandoned formation. Jadon took advantage of the opening, disabling the second ship with another well-placed shot. The final fighter retreated, its pilot unwilling to face them alone. Lyra exhaled, her body sagging with relief. "It's not over yet," Jadon said, his voice grim. "Look." She followed his gaze to the transport ship. A larger vessel had appeared, its sleek design unmistakably Corrin's. The ambush wasn't just a hunt, it was a coordinated operation. "That's not a patrol ship," Lyra said, her voice tight. Jadon's expression darkened. "He's here." The word sent a ripple of fear through her, but she pushed it down. "Then we finish this." They docked with the transport ship under the cover of the larger vessel's distraction. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. The Qatari refugees huddled in small groups, their bioluminescent eyes wide with fear. Alira's heart clenched at the sight. "Everyone listen," she said, her voice firm but calm. "We're here to help. Stay quiet and follow our lead." A man stepped forward, his movement stiff with mistrust. His skin was a darker shade of crimson, his eyes narrow and calculating. "How do we know you're not leading us into another trap?" "Because if we were, we wouldn't have risked our lives getting here," Jadon said, his voice sharp. The man hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But if you're lying—" "We're not," Alira interrupted. "Let's move." As they began ushering the refugees toward the docking bay, Alira felt a faint buzz at the edge of her mind. It was a warning, a subtle but unmistakable sense of danger. "Jadon," she said, her voice low. "Something's wrong." Before he could respond, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and a deep voice echoed through the comm system. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Alira's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was Corinne. Jaden's jaw tightened. "He's here." The ship's corridors filled with the sound of heavy boots as Corinne's soldiers boarded. Alira's wings flared, her instincts kicking in. She reached out with her telepathy, trying to anticipate their movements, but her senses were clouded by the sheer number of hostile minds. "We're out of time," Jaden said. "We have to fight." The next moments were chaos. Soldiers poured into the transport, their weapons blazing. Alira fought with the ferocity she didn't know she possessed, using her telepathy to disorient the attackers, while Jadon took them down with precision shots. The refugees huddled behind makeshift barriers, their fear palpable but contained. As the last soldier fell, the comm crackled again. Corinne's voice was calm, almost amused. "Impressive. But you've only delayed the inevitable." Before they could respond, an explosion rocked the ship. The docking bay was compromised, their escape route severed. "We're trapped," Jadon said, his voice grim. Alira's mind raced, her heart pounding. They couldn't fail now, not when they had come so far. "No," she said, determination hardening her voice. "We're not." She turned to the refugees, her gaze fierce. "Do you trust me?" The man who had questioned her earlier stepped forward, his expression grim but resolute. "We don't have a choice." Alira nodded, her telepathy flaring as she reached out, weaving a web of connection between the refugees. Their fear and doubt began to dissolve, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. "Then let's finish this," she said. And for the first time she believed they could. The ship groaned under the strain of the explosions, its frame trembling as another blast rocked the docking bay. Smoke filled the air, mingling with the acrid scent of burnt metal and scorched circuits. Alira stood at the center of the chaos, her wings flared wide, her telepathic senses buzzing with tension and fear. Jadon was beside her, his blaster drawn, his expression grim but focused. Behind them, the Qatari refugees huddled in the shadows of the cargo hold, their bioluminescent eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "They're not giving us a way out," Jadon said, his voice low but steady. "Corin wants us boxed in." "He's not going to win," Alira replied, her tone sharp. "Not here." Jadon glanced at her, his gaze lingering. "Then what's the plan?" She closed her eyes and reached out with her telepathy, her mind weaving through the chaos. The hostile thoughts of Corin's soldiers buzzed like static, but beneath the noise she found threads of fear and doubt. She grasped them, amplifying their uncertainty until it rippled through their ranks. "They're faltering," she said. "But it won't last. We need to move now." Jadon nodded, his jaw tightening. "Follow me. I'll clear the path." He led the way, his blaster cutting through the smoke as they advanced toward the control room. Alira followed, her senses sharp, her energy focused on shielding the refugees who trailed behind. The corridors were narrow and suffocating, but she pushed the rising panic aside, focusing on the faint whispers of hope she could feel emanating from those she protected. They reached the control room just as another explosion shook the ship. Inside, the air was heavy with heat, and the glow of malfunctioning screens cast eerie shadows across the walls. Corin stood at the center of the room, flanked by two soldiers, his imposing figure as cold and unyielding as the metal around them. "You've made quite the mess," Corin said, his voice calm but laced with menace. "I'll give you credit for that." Alira stepped forward, her wings spreading as she locked eyes with him. "Your games are over, Corin." The Qatari aren't yours to control." He smirked, his sharp features twisting into something almost amused. "You think you've won because you've led a few refugees to safety? You've only delayed the inevitable. The galaxy has no place for relics like you." Her anger flared, but she held it in check. Instead, she reached out with her telepathy, brushing against Corin's mind. It was a wall of steel, fortified and cold, but beneath it, she sensed a kernel of fear, a fear he buried under layers of dominance and cruelty. "You're afraid," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "You know what we represent. You know what happens if we fight back." Corin's smirk faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "You overestimate your importance. This ends here." He raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Jaden moved, a blur of motion as he disarmed one of Corin's guards. The room erupted into chaos. Blaster fire streaked through the air, the sound deafening in the confined space. Alira ducked, her mind racing as she sought an opening. When the second guard aimed at her, she didn't hesitate. She reached out with her telepathy, sending a sharp mental projection of pain into his mind. He staggered, his weapon clattering to the floor. Jaden seized the moment, finishing the fight with brutal efficiency. That left Corin. He backed away, his weapon still raised, but his confidence was faltering. "You don't know what you're doing," he snarled. "You're condemning yourselves." "No," Alira said, her voice steady. "We're freeing ourselves." She stepped forward, her wings casting long shadows in the flickering light. She could feel the weight of Corin's power, the years of fear he had instilled in others, but she didn't falter. Instead, she focused on the collective strength of the Qatari, the refugees who stood behind her, the lives that depended on her defiance. "You've taken enough from us," she said. "It ends now." Corin's hand trembled, but before he could act, Jaden fired, the shot precise and final. Corin fell, his weapon clattering to the floor as his body slumped. The room fell silent, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Alira turned to Jaden, her heart pounding. "It's over." "For now," he said, his voice quiet. "But it's not the end." Back on the transport, the mood was somber but determined. The refugees worked together to stabilize the ship, their fear replaced by a quiet resolve. Alira watched them, her chest tight with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Jaden approached, his expression softer than she'd seen before. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He chuckled, shaking his head, always sharing the credit. She turned to face him fully, her wings brushing against the edge of the console. "We wouldn't have made it without you." "Or you," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "You're stronger than you realize." The intensity in his gaze sent a shiver through her. For a moment, the noise of the ship faded, and it was just the two of them, standing amidst the remnants of their fight. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers, and the contact sent a jolt through her. "Jaden," she began, but he cut her off, his voice low and earnest. "Whatever comes next, I'm with you, no matter what." She met his gaze, her walls crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. Slowly, tentatively, she reached up, her hand resting against his cheek. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "Together." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to hope. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, but they had carved out a small victory, a spark in the darkness, and together they would make it burn brighter.